Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Welcome to the second installment of our weathering tutorial. Tonight is mostly brushwork, so if you were hoping for airbrush tips and tricks, I don't know that we're going to cover much of that tonight. A lot of what we're doing now is going to be old-fashioned brush and ink and brush and paint, and maybe even if we're lucky, a few instances to use some weathering pigments if there's time. Alright, so here you can see the model that we worked on last week. It's been chipped and I highlighted in the red so that it can be a Legion of Vega quick draw. I've added one decal to it on the center. A quick note on decaling. You know, decals can be a really cool tool to bring life to your models. I don't like over decaling though. So for this one I kept it simple and just put the one on it. What else? I did a little bit of metallic there on a few of the scratch spots, like they're fresh dents and scratches. Tonight we're going to work on how to make that look a little bit more weathered, and maybe even just cover over it depending on how I feel. And I also did a bit of green jeweling on the cockpit. So you'll notice that it has been not washed but lined already. And the reason I chose to do a line on this instead of a wash is washes can tend to tone down highlights. Well, we already chipped this one, so that with it chipped off some of the paint, and so I didn't want to worry about taking off too much more of that. So instead I used a brown ink and lined it. Now, I chose brown instead of black, partly because black will create a super strong contrast usually, and I wanted it a little bit more subtle on this one. But another thing that I wanted to go for was a more weathered look, and the brown helps me achieve that. The shoulders were done with a similar method to last week, except they were dry brushed instead of airbrushed, same with those jump jets on the back. Alright, so real quick, before we jump too far into this, I do want to talk a little bit about lining, because you'll notice that the decal on the chest covers over a panel line. I used to not care about that until I sat and listened to and read some of Hyena's comments on some of my models. He said he usually likes to put a panel line painted down that, so I kind of picked that up from him. So what we're going to do is use a little bit of a brown ink. This is Citadel's Earth Shade. Give that a good shake, get it nice and mixed up. And very carefully trace that center line. I'm using a 3-0 brush for this. And here we go. You'll notice I'm rotating the brush to find the finest point, and I'm stippling down, not just lining it. Now it's a little subtle right now, not super defined, and that's okay, because this same technique that I'm using here is going to be the basis for the rest of what we're doing tonight. Like I said, notice it's not super defined. I don't want to use black though, so I'm going to take just a touch of this dark brown. Let's pull over the palette that never gets washed. Who was that? That would have been Mr. Nissen, I think, who would have had a fit. Probably not Coach Mac. He was the art teacher that was a little, he was very mellow, very cool. So I'm picking up a little bit of this Agrax Earth shade to make kind of a watered down pigment. It's a little bit more thick than what I want. It's still very much a paint consistency. There we go. See how it's like a very watered down paint? Okay, you'll notice I'm wiping a lot of it off because I hit my camera. Because I really want to control the amount that I'm putting on. So, let's do this again. You see me wipe it off on my thumbnail? That's because I think I still have too much paint on. You see it go in much thicker, much darker. There you have it. As soon as it comes into focus, we have just painted a panel line on a decal. And if we pull it away a bit, really challenging to tell that it's not just a normal panel line. Okay, so that same idea that I just showed you is where we're going to get most of our other techniques for tonight. Now, one of the things we want to think about is what's the environment that this was in that got it rusted and beaten up. If it's a desert, it might not have as much rust, but instead we'd want to focus on things like dust. So we could use a tan color like this, or a brighter sand color, and some weathering pigments, and get those into these cracks and recesses down here. If, however, this is in like a marshy swamp condition, then we can worry about using rust. In fact, we can even get creative if it's in a swamp and use some other colors like maybe a green. Alright, if you don't have shades or inks, let's start with really basic how to mix your own. The first step is you need water, you need floor polish, and you need your ink or your pigment paint to work with. So, in the old days, this product used to be widely available, Future floor polish, but I've recently learned that it's no longer made with the same formula, and now the stuff that they market as it is awful. That's why I have it called Fake Future. This that I have here is one of the last bottles of genuine Future floor polish that I'm aware of. Okay, so we're going to start with this pipette of floor polish. See, I do have the pipettes, I just choose not to use them. And we want to come up with a ratio of about 10 drops floor polish to 10 drops water to 1 drop of ink or pigment. Okay. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Why are we using the floor polish? The important thing behind the floor polish is that it provides us a tool that prevents the ink from drying and creating wave patterns, wave pools. If we don't do that and just use water, the ink will dry unevenly and it creates a wave line. We don't want that. All right, so 10 drops polish, here's 10 drops water. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. That's a lot of stuff there. So for this model, I'm going to do it in a kind of swampy condition. And that means there's a lot of cool colors I want to use. So let's start with a really simple start. If you don't have it, you can certainly mix. Ooh, there's chestnut ink. That's not bad. Okay. So, if we don't have the ink color that we want, we can always mix something up that'll look really close. So we're going to go with that Battlefield brown color again. We still have our water right there with our solution already. So I'm going to put in just one approximate drop of this brown. Let's mix it together and see what we get. It's a little cloudy. I'd like something a little bit thicker than that, so we're going to put a little bit more pigment from the paint in. That's better. Now you'll notice that's a pretty thin pigment, which makes it perfect for a wash. We're not going to wash, we're going to use it to line, but I wanted to throw that out there anyway. Remember, it's always better to go lighter several times than real heavy ones. So if we're thinking about this as a unit that's been in rain and mud and a kind of wet environment, we need to think about where the moisture is going to collect. So definitely down around the feet. The other foot. And a quick note, it's not so important that you're necessarily super clean with weathering washes. You just need to get the pigment on there. While you're driving down the street, I want you to look at cars that, you know, have seen better days. Are they chipped and dented evenly? No. So you don't want to do that with this. We'd probably have some wear in here around the joint. I'm just going to circle the bottom of it. This is a real nice open spot that seems like moisture would get trapped in. Maybe around here. You can also use the tutorial that Flyer put up today to put some burnt metal effects on those gun barrels and those rocket launchers, missile launchers. Maybe some around the knees. I didn't want it on that red though, so I'm going to wipe it off with my finger. Same here. Seems like we might get some around the head, but since I've already jeweled it, I want to be real careful to not get the jeweling. Maybe around that arm joint. Hands would probably get kind of messy. And so on. Around the weapon there. Same here. Do some on that back portion. Down along the jump jets. Jump jet's a good soaking. But wipe off just a little bit of it. Back side of the arm too. Okay, so there's how that first part of that washing starts. Now, let's talk about some other colors. We see it's got a little bit of what looks like mud wrapped in it. That's super cool. Maybe I want to change it. Maybe I want to focus on the rust more than that. Now, for that, there's a couple things we're going to do. One is we need to find a brush that isn't our favorite anymore. In fact, it's probably one that was our favorite brush, then it got old and gross, like this one. Look at that. That's awful. My camera won't focus, just trust me on it. For this one, we're going to do something very similar. We're going to find one of our let's not use Agrax. Let's use Griffin's Sepia, or Seraphim Sepia. And we're going to start with a little bit of this blood tracker brown. Here's where another one of my favorite art rules comes into play. There is no right or wrong way to paint. There's what works. So I'm going to take a very tiny dot of the blood tracker brown, put it in this little well. Okay, let's move that out there so you can see it better. Now I'm going to add the sepia to it until I get something that's not paint consistency but wash consistency. Kind of like this metal muss right here. It's a little bit thicker than a wash, not quite that consistency, but it should be a little less watered down than paint. Just like with the last thing, we're going to find the spots where we think rust would accumulate most, and we're going to streak it in there. Now that went on really heavy, so we're going to take our paper towel, since our thumb won't reach in there, and wipe away a little bit of it. We're also going to take this color and dot a little bit of it on the shiny metal. So here we have some shiny metallic metal. Just dot that on and wipe it away. And it gives us a little bit of a less shiny effect. Okay. Unfortunately, with these lights, my paints tend to dry out a little bit faster, so I need to move quicker. I put a little bit more sepia into it, and so we're going to go down along this weapon and wipe off some. And I really want to get more in here. Okay. And again, just kind of wipe off the excess. Because we did a whole lot of work painting it, we don't want to erase too much of the detail with the weathering. Just enough. What I'm doing now is I've dipped my brush in just water, and I'm trying to kind of spread around that pigment. And a little more. This wiping technique will make a whole lot more sense here in a minute. We didn't get much on the head earlier, so let's go ahead and get some there along that ridge crest, whatever words. Maybe a little bit up there, but again, being careful not to get the jeweling. Here on the back, where rust would kind of pool and collect. I got a little bit more on there than I wanted, so I'm going to take this dry brush and just kind of rub a little bit of it off. Hopefully, one thing I would like people to take away from these tutorials is the realization that painting is kind of messy, and it's rare that it's ever perfect the first time. And there's quite a lot of adjusting and going back and fixing and touch-ups and like that. One of the cool things about chipping and weathering, though, is you can be messy. Yeah, see how that's a good example. There on the leg by the vent, that really came out like a place where moisture has caused rust to puddle. Like I said, it's not so important that it's uniform, because vehicles don't tend to rust in a uniform pattern. Let me get the feet again, because I think the feet on this miniature look a little bit too clean compared to the rest. Okay. So that's how that layer worked. And you can continue to add color that way to your heart's content. But I want to move on to the next color that we're going to use for this super rusted look. And that is Griffin Sepia, or Seraphim Sepia as our base, but we're going to add that orange that we used before to it. Preferably without spilling it. Okay. So here's our sepia. I'm going to go ahead and put it here in the same spot because it doesn't matter if it mixes with that color that was in it or not before. And then just, nope, stop that camera. Why, no, that's not what I wanted you to do. Oh, it was the cat. Okay, so we have the sepia. Just a little bit of orange. We're going to mix it right in. It's already starting to dry out, so we need to touch more of the sepia in. And same idea. Now this one, remember our rule before, you want the previous layer to show, so we're going to kind of just dot it down there at the bottom of it. And this, the dry brush, we're just going to kind of scrape it down. That'll make a little bit more sense later. Dot some there, and scrape it down. And you'll notice we're getting a nice streaking effect as we scrape it down. Now, we don't want to hide too much of our paint job, so we're not going to do too much of this. Just kind of in those spots where rust and grime would really cake on or really build up. Maybe a little bit back there. I think definitely here at the arms. I don't know about you all, but it seems that there's always one angle of a miniature that I paint I like better than others. And on this one, really this end seems to be the one that has the best contrast. Streaking down. Here in the knee joints again. And then at the feet. Now, other than that's just what seems right, there really isn't a particular method to why I chose those areas to put this rust color on. And if you chose something different when you're working on yours, that's fine too. And there's a cat hair. Another, I swear to God, cat, you are gonna die tonight. We could do a little bit of the same color down here around the end of the barrel where there would have been more rust gathered up, maybe on the stippled onto the hands. And if you're so inclined, you can even go a shade lighter and add more orange to it to get that really bright orange rust effect. One of the things I do want to do real quick is take a little bit of a wet brush, kind of wet this a little bit, and scrub it just a little bit to kind of bring up the tones, help lighten them. Okay. Now, you might need to line it one more time after you've done that, and that's okay. Like I said, painting is a stage thing where you do more than one color at a time, and sometimes you have to go back. Okay, so there's Griffin Sepia, there's orange, and there we have a really gross kind of orange color. We're going to do this in just a few tiny spots. So right here, stipple it in right there. notice we don't want it to really become so much that it overwhelms the miniature, which is why we're brushing it away. We're almost just adding a little bit of tone to it, that's all. I think I'll let that one little bit set. Same there. Maybe this time I'll streak it upwards. Going to murder an animal. Some on the metallic. Tone it down a bit. It's also a cool wash to use when you're getting to the hands. And then, let's see, maybe just a very little bit up here on the back. Kind of stippled in and then brushed in. Let's do a little bit here. Some on the hips. Okay, so that's how we can do that with washes, and you'll notice it's got a little bit more of a weathered look to it. We could even put some here along the vent and use that brush to kind of pull it down to change the tone of the arm. Same here on this side. Notice how it gives the arm just a little bit different color. Okay, that's how we use the washes to do it. Last week I described a dry brushing method to do the weathering, and I thought just for the sake of completeness I'll go ahead and demonstrate that a little bit on this miniature for everyone. It's going to use the same colors that we've just used and the ones we used last week. So let's start with this color, the Battlefield Brown. I swear, animal. See, this is why no one likes Nova cats. Alright. Scrape off most of it. And then we're going to use this technique called stippling, where you stab it with your brush. One of my favorite things about chipping and weathering is it's okay to be sloppy. There. So I'm covering over those two metallic spots because I didn't like how they looked. Alright, so there's the brown. And you'll notice it's brown. Now, that's cool, except it doesn't have that pop effect that we really want with painted miniatures. So what I'm going to do next is pull out this blood tracker brown. And if you see this blank spot on my practice sheet that I'm painting on, I didn't wash out the one brush. I'm dipping the blood tracker brown on it, just kind of mixing it together. And we're going to do the same thing of stippling, but leave a little of the layer that was there visible still. Now we want this to be a pretty dry brush, so if it goes on thick, like paint should, like right there, we're going to just wipe it off. Oh no, but it made a horrible smudge. Yep, that's okay. We want it to be rusted looking. So I'll go back to just stippling on. That's better. That's better. Same for this arm. Nope, too much. That was my finger. how it looks, you can go back and work on it more. Or you can just strip it. But I don't think this is quite bad enough to strip it. Remember that one gross brush we had earlier? It's always important to keep those once you use them. You can't use them for nice work anymore, because then you use them for things like this. And what I'm going to do is do just a little bit of brown, dark brown again, on this arm. Here, to make it pop just a little bit. All right. For the next layer, for our stippled rust effect, I want to use a mixture of the medium orange-brown color and orange. So there's the orange-brown, there's the orange. What ratio? Whatever you think looks appropriate for your project. And then we stipple that on. Sorry guys, I'm working on using the camera still. You'll notice that now it's starting to get a little bit of a rust look to it. And if you see spots you want to stipple to that you already chipped on, go for it. What? Someone say something? I missed it. Sorry guys. Okay. And now, for the last color, just straight up orange. This needs to be a pretty mellow dry brush if you don't want it to be too powerful. So just a very little bit. Yeah, just a very tiny bit. Just gonna stipple it on. If there's other spots you feel needed, maybe up here on these joints, take it out of the view. Maybe around here. Because Flyer already put together a tutorial, I'll skip the barrel weathering today, but that would be one of my next steps to do some barrel weathering on it. Oh yeah, definitely get it down here on the hands. Looks like they'd be rusted. Okay. Now, as for other weathering techniques that we can use on this, any of those things that I described earlier with mixing inks and paint, or paint turning it into an ink, would work. So if you wanted it to have green muck on it, maybe coolant's leaking somewhere, that's a super cool, easy thing to do. Let's see, does this have anything that looks like it would have coolant leaking? Any spots that look like, yeah, that's where coolant would be stored. Nothing that I see that really screams that, but I know one of the techniques that I was really thrilled to learn was how to get streaking done. Now, this piece doesn't have a whole lot of surfaces that are indicative of that sort of paint job. Not like the Atlas that I did on the Battletech Painting and Customs page, old versus new competition right at the knee. But what we can do is still go through that technique. Let's see. Find a surface everyone can see on it. Let's do the back of the arm. We're going to use the same idea that we did before of the sepia and a paint. And I have a little bit left in my palette, so I'll use that. I'm just going to take some of that, mix it in here. And this is kind of a cool trick. Much like how I used the brush before, the dry brush and the wet brush, I'm going to come along and just dot stuff in. Dot, dot, dot. Now, before it dries too much, you want to take the tip of your dry brush and just streak down like this. And you can see especially on this arm, little streaks have begun to appear. This is where a little bit of patience is required in your painting, more than usual, because it takes several layers to get this to work. Do the same thing again. And then streak, 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 streak. Streak, 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 streak. I have seen that AK makes a pigment for this, but I've never used it. It's on my list of things to try, I just haven't gotten to it yet. I'm going to add a little bit more pigment to that one wash that I just made, and that'll help speed the process just a little bit. Anyway, you can see the streaks starting to appear here. Now it'll get to a point where they're thick enough that you can go in and very carefully and quickly just trace those streaks in. Like that. Same here. That's a super cool technique and effect to use. It's just kind of a matter of making sure the miniature that you're using is good with that technique. This one has a whole lot of really nice panel lines that make it great for washes and other things, but not necessarily that streaking effect like I really like. You know, that's another important detail too of painting, is making sure that you paint the miniature the way that it's best suited for. Some pieces are better suited for certain techniques than others, and it's best to know which ones work where. And as always, if it doesn't work, that's okay. If you learn something from it, that's a good experience, and then you go and do it again. There, I like that better. So we got the streaking effect here a little bit underneath the arm on the hip, and just a very little bit on that side. I feel like this back portion on the hips is weathered enough. I don't want to do too much more to it, because at some point too much weathering makes it look just gross and gummed up. We don't want that. We still want it to look like a, you know, usable miniature. So I'm gonna come in and do just a little bit more rust on the feet, because I feel like for this piece they're not rusty enough. Maybe that back foot was okay. Take a little bit of that off. Maybe a little bit more here in the arm. A little bit more here in the arm. And there you go. That's all that we're going to do for that one with the inks and the paints. Now, another technique that you can do to get weathering is to use weathering pigments. And these are super cool powders. Where did I put them? Tamiya has some really nice ones that are usually available at local hobby shops. I've seen them at Hobby Lobby and at Hobbytown. They come in little compacts like this. I say compact because my wife calls them makeup, and we compared them before, and that's what I mean. They're dude, it's eyeshadow. Don't deceive yourself. I like this one, the Rust, Soot, and Snow. This is one of my favorite, the Orange, Rust, Gunmetal, and Silver. And then to complement Flyer's Camo Specs tutorial earlier, the Burnt Red, Burnt Blue, and Oil Stain. Those are super cool colors. For right now, let's do normal rust. Pop this out. Now you'll notice the eyeliner brush. Again, guys, let's not mix words about what it is. Can sometimes get pigment on it. The best way to clean that is find a paper towel and scrape it off on there. Otherwise your pigments tend to mix and that can get kind of gross. Okay. I'm going to rub a little bit of the rust off. We're going to apply it on the rusty spots, which means right here, pull down. Now this miniature already has a whole lot of rust on it, so I don't want to do too much. But you'll see like right here on this knee, there's some, so I'll just do a little bit. And this kind of gives that look of, oh, it's chipped and it's rusting around it. But you'll notice we also got a similar effect from the washes. So don't think you need Tamiya weathering pigments to get good rust effects when you can do it with a wash. I mean, yeah, it's cool to have the nicest or the newest gimmicks and toys, but they're not necessary. And you'll notice I don't want to hide too much of the paint job we did, which is what weathering can sometimes do. Like, this guy's getting pretty beat up. Compare it to how it looked when we started. So any of the pigments work pretty much like that. The only thing that I think I'm going to do extra for this piece is give it a little bit of a pull out the soot pigment that's on the case that I have. And I want to apply that around the barrels, the rocket launchers and everything. That way it looks old but still used recently. And I'm going to use one of my favorite things, stippling. Just going to stipple the soot around. You see it's coming off in kind of a dark color. Stipple some soot there. Gun barrels. The laser barrels. You have to make the sound effects when you do it, otherwise it doesn't work. And we can even come back here and do some soot on the jump jet exhaust. Just like anything else, it works in layers. So we do one layer, but just like anything else too, you don't want too much. Now, the one thing that is interesting about these pigments is that if you spray them with sealer, they kind of disappear. Like, you really got to cake it on if you're going to use sealer. So instead of that, the best thing that I have found, thank you Psycho, is alcohol. Now, not, booze alcohol. I mean, that might work, but that would be kind of expensive. No, what we're going to use is rubbing alcohol. You can airbrush the rubbing alcohol on to lock this stuff in place. You can just drop little drips of it on. Using what technique? Stippling! That'll help it set in place. But that, the alcohol helps the pigment to really stick to where it needs to be. You might need to, after doing the weathering and the washes, need to go back and do a little bit of touch-up with your lining. And, we're trying to kind of strike a balance here between, yes, does it look weathered, but are you able to tell that it's, a model that has detail and represents a neck? It's kind of like with painting camouflage. If you paint camouflage too realistically, it does the job and your miniature disappears. So I'm going to use just a touch of earth shade some lining here, and here, and here. And a little bit here. Really, that's not too much. I need to go back and reline. I want to reline that though. I think that's about it. You know, that's one of the hardest challenges of painting too, is knowing when to stop. Not just stop for the night. That can be a challenge too. But I mean knowing when to stop, like to stop painting. That knowing that whatever you're gonna do next is just gonna make it worse. And that you've met that point where you've done everything you can and it's time to stop. And I think, considering that we've turned this guy from a gray colored Legion of Vega piece to kind of a tan and brown colored one, we might be quickly approaching that. Now, I sealed him before I started tonight's tutorial, after I put the decal on. One, because I tend to accidentally pull decals off when I'm working, but also because if we do too much, but it's sealed, you can always go back and take some of it off. If we haven't sealed it yet though, well, there's not much that we can do. We're kind of stuck and gotta start over. Were this a miniature that I was going to finish soon, I would probably do the base next. And I don't know. What's an easy base, since I've got everyone here. Usually it's pretty safe to do something that's kind of a deserty color. Battlefield brown is a really good starting color for any base. So I'll start with that on it. I'll just try to fill in little dots, little rocks. Might take a little while to do that because of the lights. Whoops. The lights kind of making stuff up. Otherwise, that's about all that's left with this one is the base. Maybe some grass or something for it. Knocking the camera over. I'm not certain which I would want to do for the base for this one yet. I haven't really thought that through. I don't remember the color scheme that I used on my weathered Highlander and weathered Banshee. I want to say I used something like Trader Green from Privateer Press in it. But for this part, we're just going to try and get all the brown paint on it. Because it's a gray base, if we miss a spot and it stays gray, that's okay. It won't seem too out of place. I will on occasion airbrush my bases, but usually I reserve that for when the base is like, you know, desert, and I mean like desert that's not gravel looking. If it's desert that's gravel looking, I'll dry brush it still. And yes, airbrushing right now would be way quicker. But I did say tonight that I was going to try and not airbrush, except to seal it. But I won't make you guys watch that. Not tonight, anyway. Oh, we have to get the cat hair out still, too. Doing what I'm doing now, it's watered down dark brown. And it's always best to use an old brush for this. Because painting this gravel like I am now would tear up a new brush. Or a good brush. We have a nice brown base on it. It definitely has an earthen color to it. Let's see. I kind of want to do a desert looking base for it. But you know, I don't know what color I would paint my later Legion of Vega units. I kind of don't want to. I want to be able to put this guy out there with him. Oh well. So deserts are kind of a tricky color to paint, I've discovered. You gotta kind of think about the colors that you're going to use in it. And what I have found is one of the best colors to use after you put on that dark brown is this kind of yellow color. You can also get by with this ochre color. I think we're going to use the ochre one for this one. The term that I would describe what I'm going to do next is a heavy dry brush. Man, I really want to airbrush this, but I'm not going to. Said I wasn't going to airbrush, which is a shame, because I got a super cool new one from one of my Patreon donors. And we're going to heavy airbrush this in. Now it's going to cover up a lot. Let's paint in front of the camera. It's going to cover up a lot of the brown, and that's okay. Some of the brown shows through, that's good. Some of the brown doesn't show through, that's okay too. But being that we want kind of a sand gravel look color, we really want this to get in there and get it. I think this is the equivalent of the old GW Vomit Brown. I have mixed feelings about if you get it on the feet. Sometimes it's okay, because it's easy to write off as, oh, that's dust, yay, if it looks correct. I mean, I know I said that, you know, weathering is uneven and such, but it can look incorrect. So, and that kind of builds into the other, one of my major rules of painting is if you're happy with it, it doesn't matter what it looks like. Which means that there's a lot of things that I paint that it does matter what it looks like. I have to be very particular about how it's looking. Okay, before I put too much more paint on there, that casual's gotta go. There. And again. Because we're not really particular about how much paint we get on this right now. I'm not even really drying it off much between coats. Just kind of putting it on. It is important that it's relatively even. There we go. And if I put clumps of grass on it, that'll help to cover some of the spots that aren't quite as well painted. Okay. So now we have that. Now that doesn't look too super exciting. So we're going to jump to a little bit of a tan color. This, it's mint off white base. You'll notice it's a little bit darker than bleached bone. Or a little bit more rich, maybe, is the word I want to use. Now we're going to go ahead and wipe some of it out. It's better to wipe out too much and have to come back and do it again than too little and mess it up. You'll notice we're still trying to preserve some of that yellow color underneath, but get this color on it too. You should also notice I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure on the brush, just enough. And I'm making several passes. I promise, guys, this won't be another 2-hour session. Just a touch more. Uh-oh. Got a little bit on there. That's okay, we'll get it off. At this without messing up the camera.
Ooh, I got Starbucks. Thank you, sweeties. You're the best.
That's my wife. She's pretty great. She's the one who told me about our painting thing is makeup. Guys, I'm not even kidding. It's true. In fact, it'll probably be cheaper to go with your wife when she's makeup shopping and go in the aisle where they have all the weird colors that we would use as paints and buy those. And if you do that successfully, I need you to tell me how well it worked out. Alright, so now we've got a little bit more of a sand color. Still don't know how I feel about this. The next color that I'd like to use is Minoth White Highlight. It's not quite white, but it's definitely not bleached bone. It's lighter than that. It's kind of in between. I think GW used to have a color like this, but I don't remember what it was called. And this needs to be a really light coat. So we're just going to kind of hit the spots that seem like they'd have the most of a highlight. Sorry guys, I'm trying to keep it all in there where you can see it. Okay. Now, for the absolute last coat, we're going to use just a little bit of white. I don't have white from E3, I think, but I do have this. Now you'll notice I haven't washed my brush out yet, so it's going to give me an interesting color. I might wash it out here in a second. remember, we want a little bit of the previous layer showing still. And there we go. So it ended up in a desert, or on a desert style base anyway. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with it for it being a hey, what can I paint to show this technique moment. I don't know that I'll put my own Legion of Vega on a desert base like that. We'll have to see what happens when I ever get around to painting minis for myself someday. But I do know that pretty soon there will be a Legion of Vega Lanza that I'll be working on in the future at some point. Let's see. I will say, since we talked about washes earlier, if you ever do a base and it comes out too bright, put a quick wash on it, let it set. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by the results of toning it down a bit. The reason I'm not going to do that on this one, however, is because I want it to have that kind of dry, deserty look to it, which might be a little bit counter to the mech being that style of weather. Oh well, I think it works, right? Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you all for coming in. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to leave them in the video section, or the comment section of this video. If you haven't, come check out my website at captaineds.weebly.com, or if any of you are so inclined, please check out my Patreon page, also linked on my Weebly account, or my Weebly page. There you can find ways to subscribe to and support the continuing of this art. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Shutdown sequence initiated.